Good morning, school. My name's Mr. Waterhouse, and I'm going to talk to you for today's reflection section about LGBTQ History Month, which, for those who don't know, stands for Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Transgender and Queer History Month, which is celebrated throughout February in the UK. In this reflection section, I'm going to talk a little bit about the background of some of the reasons why we mark this occasion, but also celebrate some important queer figures from history who you may or may not know about and who I think are pretty central to our experience in the UK today. So, to begin to contextualise LGBTQ History Month, I want to make you aware of a piece of historical legislation called Section 28. Section 28 was a clause of a local government act intended to stop a council from, and this is a quote, promoting the teaching of the acceptability of homosexuality as a pretended family relationship. Now, what this essentially meant for teachers is that they were prohibited by law from talking about gay relationships to students in the classroom, but by extension, many teachers also felt they couldn't stand up for the victims of homophobic bullying in case they were seen to be promoting it, as mentioned in the legislation. On the screen now is a timeline beginning at the start of the 19th century, when schools became to be separated from religious institutions, and therefore something like the modern education system we know today was born. I'd like you to try and picture where on this timeline you think this piece of legislation, Section 28, might have fallen, wherein teachers were not allowed to actively, as they say, promote the idea of homosexuality as a pretended family relationship. You may be surprised to find that this legislation doesn't actually come from ancient history, but actually was enacted in 1988 and repealed in 2003. Leaving us with the stark reality that 18 years ago, this assembly would have been illegal.
I desperately needed to talk to somebody, and I was sat here with a teacher, trembling, skirting around it. I mean, I was quite an effeminate child, and I think probably he would have picked up on the fact that other kids, would call me, queer and so on. But I felt like he was scared of specifically addressing it. I'm sure the reason for my teacher's reticence was Section 28.
Now the rest of the news. The government is to ban the promotion of homosexuality in schools.
Section 28 was enacted 30 years ago in a climate that was very different for LGBT people.
I obviously don't want children taught that the gay and lesbian lifestyle is natural or normal. It is not, it never has been, and it never will be.
As ordinary men and women.
Back then, you could be fired for being gay, homophobic headlines were a daily occurrence, gay people portrayed as a menace to society. 75% of the British public believed homosexuality was always or mostly wrong.
I hesitate to use the word perversion, but let's face up to the truth of this situation. That's what it is.
Despite mass protests and a campaign of civil disobedience, Section 28 became law in 1988.
Children who need to be taught to respect traditional moral values are being taught that they have an inalienable right to be gay.
These sorts of views may seem extreme or outdated to us now, but as this quote from our current Prime Minister shows, support for the legislation was reasonably widespread. Section 28 was active throughout my entire time at primary school and high school, and so I knew that meant there was nobody at school who I could talk to about my experience growing up as gay. And that's a reason why I think it's so important that we should mark LGBTQ History Month in school, and why I'd really like to just share some stories with you now about some really important and notable historical figures who also just happen to be LGBTQ. Alan Turing was born in 1912 and was an English computer scientist and mathematician who, it's no exaggeration to say, essentially invented what we know today as the computer. One of his greatest achievements was during World War II, when he worked for the government and was tasked with intercepting complex coded messages from Nazi forces. His creation of the Enigma machine cracked their codes, and at the upper end it's been estimated that his work shortened the war in Europe by more than 2 years and saved over 14 million lives. Despite these accomplishments, he was never fully recognised in his home country during his lifetime, partially because much of his work was covered by the Official Secrets Act, but also due to the prevalence of homophobia at the time. In fact, in 1952, he was prosecuted for gross indecency for homosexual acts and subjected to horrific hormone treatment, now known as chemical castration, which ultimately contributed to his untimely death at 41 years old. Thankfully though, Turing's truly exceptional achievements have been much more widely recognised in recent years, including the granting of a posthumous pardon by the Queen in 2013, and an official public apology from Prime Minister Gordon Brown. Florence Nightingale, somebody you probably know, was an English social reformer and more widely known as the founder of modern nursing. Nightingale came to prominence while serving as a manager and trainer of nurses during the Crimean War, in which she organised care for wounded soldiers at Constantinople. She gave nursing a favourable reputation and became an icon of Victorian culture, especially in the persona of the Lady with the Lamp, making rounds of wounded soldiers at night. It's documented that Nightingale had a number of same-sex relationships, including with Mariana Nicholson, with whom she was apparently so in love that she pretended to be her brother, Henry, in order to avoid the judgment of others. Throughout history, important figures have been well documented to have same-sex relationships, but these are almost always left out of the history books, meaning that for young LGBTQ+ people, there is a lack of historical queer icons. Imagine the impact on a young LGBTQ+ person in finding out that Leonardo da Vinci, the Italian polymath of the High Renaissance, who's widely considered to be one of the most diversely talented individuals to have ever lived, according to many biographers, lived openly as a gay man in 15th century Florence. Or perhaps more recently, 20th century icons such as the American First Lady, Eleanor Roosevelt, whose numerous love letters to female companion Lorena Hickok show a long and enduring love affair. The importance of LGBTQ+ representation in the media really can't be understated. It's fundamental in developing a sense of self to be able to see oneself represented on screen or in the pages of literature. And that for me is what makes posts such as this one, decrying the use of gay characters by Netflix as somehow unnecessary, to be truly troubling. Netflix as a broadcaster has actually been reasonably pioneering when it comes to LGBTQ+ representation, but that's not universally the case. Here, Laverne Cox talks about her experiences as a trans woman in the media.
I can't even tell you how many times I've been in public space, particularly early in my transition, when I would walk into a subway car and people would just burst into laughter. And I think people are been trained to have that reaction. According to a study from GLAAD, 80% of Americans don't actually personally know someone who is transgender. So most of the information that Americans get about who transgender people are, what our lives are and are about, comes from the media.
Thank you for watching today's reflection section video. For more information, please visit www.lgbtplushistorymonth.co.uk or search for any of the organisations that you see on screen.